Even angry with the answers you're receiving to your pressing biblical questions? Are you hungry for some straight-talking biblical truth? Welcome into Igniting a Nation's Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. We're not afraid to tackle these issues and find the answers. Call us now at 850-660-9595. Here's your host, Rabbi Eric Walker.
Shalom, shalom. Good morning to you. Welcome into this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we talk about the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. This is a live call-in show, and the phone lines are open at 850-660-9595. Give me a call and let's talk about what's on your heart, mind, or spirit. These 2 hours are just a small part of the 24/7 programming on our station, where you can listen on the iHeartRadio app, the Igniting a Nation apps, the live365.com app, and at the ignitinganation.com website. These 2 hours from 8 to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday are simulcast on all social media, so you can watch and listen. The programs throughout the day are teachings and sermons given over the past 20 years. If you're interested in the full series or a particular teaching, visit the Biblical Truth Library on our website, where you can acquire the entire teaching. We never want to fail to express our deepest appreciation to our faithful donors and our sponsors, the Don Burt team at Keller Williams Emerald Coast and Navarre Chiropractic Center. In both cases, I have personal experience, and with Dawn and her team, who have been serving the needs of both military and civilian clients for many years and is loved by all, she personally helped me and continues to help myself and my daughter with all of our real estate needs. If you're even thinking about relocating to the beautiful Emerald Coast or considering a move of any kind in Northwest Florida, give Dawn and her team a call at 850-684-4284 and check them out online at www.teamburt.com. And of course, our great friends and my personal chiropractor at Navarre Chiropractic Center, Dr. Laird Lakins, and the entire team took me from 24 hours a day of debilitating neck pain to a pain-free life. Not all chiropractors are focused on a holistic approach that incorporates every technique from classical adjustment to acupuncture, heat therapy, traction, massage, and personal trainers to make sure you'll get the best care possible. This full service practice should be your first stop after a car accident or any injury to your body. No insurance, no worries. They have a plan to accommodate any situation. Give them a call right now at 850-939-3339 and look them up online at NavarreChiropracticCenter.com. Welcome into our Wednesday program. This is our Revealing Prophecy program, and we take some of the headlines that have captured my attention. Today is a lot of focus on Israel, because we are in that season where spiritually we are what's called the month. The month is called Elul, E-L-U-L, the month of Elul. This is the month preceding really the 40 days, not really the month of Elul, but the period of Elul, a period of 40 days until the Feast of Trumpets, which concurs with the civil New Year. And, there's many New Years. So we have a school New Year, we have a corporate New Year, we have a civil New Year, we have religious New Years, we have all kinds of New Years. Well, in Leviticus 23, the Feast of Trumpets is practiced as Rosh Hashanah, which means Rosh head, Hashanah, New Year. So the head of the year, or a new year, if you will. But during that time, the shofar is blown for many on a daily basis. For congregations, it is blown on Shabbat. And it really carries three messages. Now, this is where the tradition kind of lines up with biblical inspiration, but is not biblically required. So there's no passage of scripture that you're going to read in the Old Testament that's going to tell you that you need to blow the shofar on these days leading up to this period of time. But as we look through Israel's history, and as we look through the battles that have come, and we look at the role of the shofar as being a tool of communication, a battle cry, a call to awaken, a call to assembly, a call to advance, we see at this time that this is a spiritual call that serves a couple purposes. One, to announce the season that we're in. We're approaching the fall feast. And the fall feast in Leviticus lay out a pattern. Now, Messiah came to fulfill the spring feast. And our hope and expectation is that he will return to fulfill the fall feast. Those fall feasts are three. There is the Feast of Trumpets. There is 10 days later, the Day of Atonement. And 5 days after that is the Feast of Tabernacles. So we expect during that time for Messiah to come, to have all of Israel saved, and for him to come and tabernacle or dwell with his people on the Feast of Tabernacles. The shofar blast is a proclamation, announcement of what the season is. It's also a warning cry to the enemy to say, hey, Messiah is coming. And we are anticipating and we are expecting, and we're giving you a warning that he's coming. This is us on the lookout. This is us fulfilling scriptures, being on the lookout. And the third is that its purpose is to awaken the slumbering heart, the one who has not devoted his time to the study of the word, the one who has fallen away, the one who has backslidden, the one who has gone awry, and to return. And so it's a period of repentance, it's a period of reflection, and it's a time of anticipation for when the enemy might strike. And always, as we prepare for the Feast of God, these are not the Jewish holidays. This is Leviticus 23, the Moedim, a period of time which God says, these are my appointed times. And they are appointed times for all seasons. They are everlasting, and they are in existence today and observed today. But during this time, we also know, and we know from history during the Yom Kippur War, that while soldiers were at home or in synagogue worshiping and fasting, that Israel was attacked. And so we look historically in the Bible that there were times when God said, wait for the men to go to sleep or wait for them to be in pain, and he would call for the Israelites to attack. So we prepare at this time. And because we're preparing at this time, things are heating up in the Middle East. So much so, and I don't remember if it's in one of these stories or if it's another story that I read, that Syria has requested Iran not to launch any nuclear military attacks from Syria. That tells you a couple things. That's a very telling statement. That statement says that, number one, that through these proxy of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of all the different proxy groups, that word is spreading that Iran is preparing to attack Israel. And if Iran is preparing to attack Israel, they're going to do it from Lebanon. They want to do it from Syria. They want to engage it from Iraq. They want to get as close to the borders of Israel as they possibly can. And of course, Lebanon and Syria and Iraq all share a border with Israel. So things are heating up. The chatter on the street is things are heating up. And in this first story, it kind of emphasizes that. Hezbollah's September deadline could lead to war with Israel. Although most Israelis fear September 1st may bring with it a teacher's strike, there is another reason we should be concerned: a possible war on Israel's northern border in the wake of the most severe threats since 2006. So that's 16 years ago since things have been this tense on the northern border. The very fact that Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah has emerged from the bunker where he's been hiding most of the past 16 years suggests that the effect of the crushing blow he was dealt in the 2006 Second Lebanon War has somewhat faded. Nasrallah's swagger means he is convinced that the next flare-up with Israel will be very different from the one that saw him run into hiding in 2006. Nasrallah is not the adventurous or gambling type. His many years at the helm have taught him how to spout lofty rhetoric while adopting a cautious posture. He's not going to suddenly launch a surprise missile barrage on Tel Aviv. On the other hand, he is apparently willing to play with fire, convinced he can control the blaze. The threats he has been sounding are very clear. If Israel goes ahead with its plan to extract gas from the Karish field in the Mediterranean Sea without resolving its border dispute with Lebanon, the Shiite terrorist group will act to stop it, even if that means a full-scale conflagration. Hezbollah, the Shiite terrorist group. Here we have this leader who is willing to put it all on the line if this dispute regarding the gas field that Lebanon thinks that they have a claim to and Israel does not get resolved. To show just how serious he is, Nasrallah has sent drones toward the Karish floating production storage and offloading vessel, and may very well do so again, or perhaps even escalate things by firing rockets in its general direction. So for those of you that have been kind of asleep at the wheel because you haven't been hearing or reading of large-scale conflicts or Israel preparing or what the word on the street is, Hezbollah is now rearing its ugly head with the full support of Iran, who is expecting Joe Biden to fund their campaign of war against Israel. Obama did it. And that money went to fuel terrorism. Biden's going to do it, and that money is going to fuel terrorism. So they feel emboldened. They feel the time is right. This poses a direct threat to Israel's sovereignty and strategic assets. It can entail much greater consequences than just breaching the land border or targeting soldiers on it, which usually leads to rather limited hostilities that Israel chooses to contain. Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, recently warned that Israel would retaliate for any provocation and is ready for any campaign in Lebanon should the need arise. Now, we know from Psalm 83 that the people group in Lebanon are involved as one of the Confederates. And we also know that there is the implication of a war before the war scenario. So Psalm 83 coming before Ezekiel 38 and 39. Why do we say that? Well, because the prerequisites for Ezekiel 38 and 39 say that Israel is at peace with its neighbor. It says that Israel is in a position that They have great wealth. They're in a position where there are no walls and borders. Well, in order to do that, they would have to extend their tent pegs to the nations surrounding them, to annex them, to conquer them, to defeat them, and then pull them into and under the sovereign state of Israel. Senior Israeli officials have assessed that things could evolve into multi-day fighting, which is another way of saying a major confrontation along the border. But if this is the conventional wisdom, it suggests Israel policymakers have yet to learn the lessons of 2006. Days of fighting ultimately morph into war, something for which Israel is ill-prepared. Those who envision a multi-day offensive that would have Nasrallah fire missile barrages at Israeli cities and strategic assets while Israel responds by just destroying a few weapon depots or assassinating a few officials are kidding themselves. In 2006, Israel showed mercy towards Lebanon, but this policy did not stand the test of time because Lebanon and Hezbollah are one and the same. Israel failed to realize that by targeting the Lebanese state, it would have been able to hurt the Shiite terrorist group. Nevertheless, the Israeli aerial onslaught on Hezbollah's Daya stronghold in Beirut, despite its disorderly approach, did have an impact. If Nasrallah wants war, Israel should be prepared to go all in. But if Israel's threats as to the catastrophic impact on Lebanon do not materialize once the war breaks out, Nasrallah will interpret it as yet another divine victory, laying the groundwork for yet another flare-up down the road. This was originally published by the Jewish National Service Organization, reposted with their permission. So what does this mean? Iran's proxies. Hezbollah, a terrorist group, has taken over an entire country, Lebanon. So Lebanon and Hezbollah are the same. Hezbollah is the government running Lebanon. In the same way that Hamas took over Gaza and even wrestled it from the hands of the PLO, from Fatah operating out of Ramallah and Judea and Samaria, they, a terrorist group, had enough backing, enough funding to win an election. So Hamas and Gaza are virtually synonymous. Now, does that mean the people on the street share the same radical agenda? And this is one area where I try to be very careful in my discussions about Christianity and the church, careful about the Catholic Church, careful about Islam, careful about the people groups that we're talking about. Because we cannot label the people for the crimes of the leadership. What Joe Biden does is not me. What Barack Obama did was not me, a citizen of the United States. And when we do these surveys to see who is supporting and who's not supporting, we're sending a message out. Why do we do these surveys? Why do we want to tell the world that 65% of Americans don't support this president's agenda? It's because when a time of conflict comes, we want the world to be aware that the leadership is not representing the people. In the case of Lebanon, this is a people subjected to a Shiite terrorist organization running the country. In Gaza, Hamas is a terrorist organization running the company. They are the political leadership. The people of the country are suffering. And if you look at some of the backdoor surveys that have been done, some of the underground work that's been released, you'll find that the average person in Gaza doesn't want terrorism. They want jobs and opportunity and provision for their families. But their leadership is so committed to this Iranian Shiite agenda. Now, if you're not familiar with the terms Shiite and Sunni, those are two terms you need to become aware of. They are two factions of Islam, with about 85% of Islam being Sunni and about 15% being Shiite. But the Shiite nations are the ones that we get very little information out of. And you find them increasing in their penetration of the society. Where a country might have been 50% Muslim, they're now 80 or 90% Muslim. And then all of a sudden, the news stops flowing freely. Great example was COVID-19. We were getting reports from all over the world, but we didn't hear anything from the Muslim nations. They're not a freely sharing. They don't want us to know that the imams in their mosques are preaching against America and against Israel. Nani Darwish, whose father was an Egyptian leader and was martyred, was killed in the war, has come to faith in Jesus, has become an American citizen, and visits on occasion the mosques in Los Angeles. And she is hearing from the pulpits in the mosque in America the same terrorist rhetoric that's being preached in Tehran, that's being preached in Syria, that's being preached in Lebanon. But we don't have access to anybody but organizations like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and they put their spin on what a peaceful, they call it a religion, I call it an ideology. So I have a series that is available on YouTube or on the Biblical Truth Library that explains Islam. It's called Islam Exposed. And it takes you through an understanding of who the Shiites are and who the Sunnis are, and what happened, the radical shift that took place when the fall of the Shah of Iran took place with Jimmy Carter, and how they have grown, how the Muslim Brotherhood has had an influence in American politics since the 50s. And there's a picture that stunned me that I saw where Dwight Eisenhower was in the Oval Office, surrounded by representatives from the Muslim Brotherhood, because he had identified them as a group that he should be aware of, because we were in negotiations for oil and for alliances. And they were a cohesive group that represented the interests of that portion of the Middle East. But the Muslim Brotherhood was invited into the White House and, in my opinion, have never left. And the writing of the Immigration Naturalization Act of 1952, which was the year of my birth and the year that Eisenhower entertained them, and out of it came this policy that said you can you can immigrate to America, you can come over our borders, you can fill out your application, and you can come here and work to become a citizen, but you must swear your allegiance to the Constitution of the United States as the highest authority. When Barack Obama came into office, he removed that clause so that Muslims did not have to state that the Constitution of the United States was above the Quran. So they didn't have to pledge loyalty to this country. So our borders are being overrun with people who do not have to swear allegiance to this nation. But the average person on the streets of Gaza, the average person on the streets of Lebanon, does not want this. But the leadership is aligned with the Ayatollah, aligned with the Shiite agenda of labeling America as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. And they are absolutely resolute in their desire to destroy Israel. And you say, but there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque and there's the Dome of the Rock, and these are such holy sites. They didn't care. They didn't care. And they don't care. And it's not because they love the land. Because Israelis fight and join the IDF as a requirement of their citizenship in Israel because they love the land and they're willing to die for it. No, these terrorist organizations don't love the land. They hate the Jews. This is a hatred that goes back to the people groups that are named in these confederacies. The Edomites, the descendants of Esau, the Moabites. Look at these people groups and see who they are and see who they're descended from, to find out where this generational hatred, just like we talked about the 16 generations of hatred coming from Saul's error from not killing Amalek to having Haman born. This is the culture of the Shiite mind. It's inherent, it courses through their blood. And it's for the destruction of Israel, which is an attack on you and me and every person who puts their faith in the Jewish Messiah. Because as I've stated in my book, 3:15, The Genesis of All Prophecy, that the seed line of Messiah runs through the Jewish people, and if you eliminate the Jewish people, you eliminate the seed line of Messiah, and Jesus does not come back. We're going to take a short break, and we'll pick this up on the other side.
We'll be right back with more Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker right after this commercial break.
People do some pretty cool things in their 40s and 50s. Why should saving for retirement be any different? I mean, they go back to college, learn new instruments, start skateboarding.
Whoa!
Okay, maybe that one's not for everybody, but saving for retirement is. With aceyourretirement.org, you can get on track with your retirement savings no matter your age. Just have a 3-minute chat with Avo, the friendly digital retirement coach from AARP. You'll get personalized recommendations based on your input that are easy to understand and work with your lifestyle. It's quick, easy, and free. Plus, it's sponsored by AARP, so you know they got your back.
Woohoo! Gnarly move, Dad. Thanks, sweetie.
So wherever you are in your retirement savings journey, head to aceyourretirement.org and start chatting with Avo today. That's aceyourretirement.org. A message from AARP and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
In the Garden of Eden, God spoke his first prophecy. Not much has been said or written about the eternal impact of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. What if every prophecy, and even Jesus' return, was tied to this prophecy and no one ever told you? Now you have a chance to read for yourself Rabbi Eric's latest book, 315, The Genesis of All Prophecy, featured on Skywatch TV. This book is a must-read. Get your copy at Amazon or from Skywatch TV. And don't forget to order The Codist, Rabbi Eric's prophetic biblical thriller, exposing a diabolical plot to weaponize your DNA. And while you're at it, get his book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living. Welcome back to Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. Here's your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, ready to take your calls at 850-660-9595.
Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we talk about the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and today is our Revealing Prophecy Wednesday, and we're talking about the situation in Israel and how things are heating up and why the season and the timing of all this is very much in tune with Israel preparing for a potential teacher's strike that may be announced tomorrow, which would bring the kids home. And that then changes the whole dynamic of people being able to work, and the same way that COVID impacted all of us and all of them. It's also a time when the Jewish world is preparing itself for the coming fall feasts, and they are quite significant in the preparations and in the work that's done in the home, in the community. And so there is a certain amount of distraction in this preparation. So very important to understand contextually, just like when we study the Bible, contextually what's going on concurrent with these threats that are coming in. Why are they coming in now? Well, the reason is because there's an opening. And the opening is the confusion in the leadership in the government, the return to the talking table of Benjamin Netanyahu, still under investigation, but yet seemingly more vocal than he's been in the past. And there is no clear leading party. So you have this shared prime ministership, and a horse with two heads is a freak of nature. And thinking about Israel and its leadership being divided gives me concern for their ability to react cohesively in the face of a threat like this. This next story is entitled An End to the Delusions About Biden, Iran, and Israel. Like any gambler who is willing to seize on any glimmer of hope that irresponsible betting will be rewarded with an unexpected reversal of fortune, Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid was sounding hopeful this week. The Israeli government that he now leads spent the last year wagering the Jewish state security on the idea that better relations with the Biden administration and a decision to downplay differences would influence Washington to finally showing some spine and stop appeasing Iran. So it was hardly unexpected that Lapid would seize on the news the United States had hardened its response to the latest Iranian counteroffer in the talks about renewing the 2015 nuclear deal. The good news consisted of a report claiming that Lapid had been told by Washington that it would not give in to Iranian demands that the International Atomic Energy Agency cease investigating Tehran's nuclear program, or take the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps off the U.S. foreign terrorist organizations. Shorn of context, that might be an encouraging development. But with the international media publishing multiple stories based on leaks from the administration about an agreement between the two sides being imminent, the notion that any victory on these 2 points, whether temporary or not, vindicates the decision Lapid's tactic is risible. Even taken in isolation, these points don't mean that much. As bad as giving in on that point would be, the IRGC issue is largely symbolic. If a new deal is reached, Iran's terrorist arm will be immeasurably strengthened and enriched along with the rest of the regime, regardless of whether or not they're on a U.S. terror list or not. So the things that the State Department and the diplomats hang their hats on is this rhetoric. Oh, we have Iran's Revolutionary Guard on a terror list. We know and we recognize who they are. Let me tell you, if you get a copy of 315, The Genesis of All Prophecy, there's an entire section of the book which gives you a complete breakdown on what the State Department and the Department of Defense teaches government employees and military personnel about Islam. It is the official document issued out of Washington, D.C. that I was able to get a hold of. And because of the laws we're protected under, was able to publish it so that you could read it for yourself. Contained also in that book is the United Nations publication on Israel. And so 2 documents contained in this one book that are historical, that are absolutely verifiable, they're taken directly from their sites, tells you that the world is against Israel. So this rhetoric of saying somebody's on a terrorist watch list is meaningless. Regardless of whether they're on a U.S. list of terror groups, it's also true that even if Iran doesn't get Biden to agree to drop the involvement of the International Atomic Energy Commission altogether, that means nothing. As the Iranians have demonstrated ever since former President Barack Obama's signature foreign policy achievement was put into force in 2015, they have no compunctions about repeatedly violating it, especially with regard to flouting the components requiring compliance with the International Atomic Energy Commission's regulations. More to the point, if these provisions and other points of equal importance are the only obstacles standing between an agreement, then Lapid knows his hopes of persuading the administration not to sign a new deal are negligible. As Lapid has recently reiterated, Israel's position as the United States and its partners in the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, are making a huge mistake. Mossad Chief David Barnea has been adamant in insisting that the plan is a strategic disaster for Israel and is based on lies. Far from stopping the Iranian quest for a nuclear weapon, like the 2015 JCPOA, a new deal would be more or less guarantee that they will soon have one. As Barnea said, it gives Iran license to amass the required nuclear material for a bomb in a few years, after which the restrictions on its program will expire at the end of the decade. At the same time, the lifting of sanctions will allow the Iranians to expand their oil sales and also give them billions in currently frozen money. That will make the despotic theocracy stronger at home and better able to repress dissent. You see, there have been riots on the streets of Tehran. There have been acts of civil disobedience against this regime. However, these dissenters are being killed, they're being imprisoned, they are being tortured, they're being silenced. And you and I are not reading about it or hearing about it. But through back channels, there are a lot who are trying to organize to overthrow the existing government, but they have too much power. And much of their power is tied up in their oil reserves. So the strategic mistake that we made under the Carter administration and watching the fall of the Shah of Iran and the rising of the Ayatollah and the Shiite takeover with this jihad agenda. So from 1979 to present day is what, 43 years they've had to entrench themselves in the leadership of this country, who is adamant about destroying Israel. So not only will they be able to repress dissent, it will also allow them to increase funding to the terrorist proxies like Hezbollah and Lebanon, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip, and the Houthis in Yemen, making the Middle East immeasurably more dangerous for Sunni Arab nations as well as Israel. Now, the Sunnis are not aligned with the Shiites. There is a family dispute going all the way back as to who the Mahdi, the Imam, the Messiah would come through, whether or not it would be birthed into the Sunni nation, that's why they call them the birthers, or whether or not it will be the religious Shiite leadership coming out of the terrorist-minded, literal appliers of the violence and the mission to Islamicize the entire world. Now, I'm going to go on record for the sake of Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and for you to know my position. I am not anti-Arab. I'm not anti-Muslim. I'm in fact not anti-anybody. I am pro-Jesus and pro the Bible and pro the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The friend of my enemy is my enemy. It's a famous quote. But those who are aligned with an agenda, whether or not it be in America and it be a denomination of Christianity, or it be a Shiite terrorist group looking to annihilate Israel, they are my enemy. They may be my brothers in the Lord as Christians, but I am a sheep believer, and they are a goat believer, and we will be separated. And so I pray for them, and I love them, but I will speak honestly about any denomination or any group of people, whether Muslim, Christian, Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu, it doesn't matter to me who you are. If you are opposed to the chosen land of God's people and to the Jewish lineage and the seed line of Messiah, then I'm opposed to you. And we need to take a firm stand. And this country is funding terrorism in Israel. So the Sunni nations, and you can look at a map, go on Google and search who the Shiite countries are and who the Sunni countries are, and you're going to find something very interesting. This dates back to Ishmael and the 12 provinces, 12 kingdoms that Ishmael was given. And that 12 has now grown to, I don't even know what the current number is, but you'll see that the nations are mostly, the Sunni Muslim nations are mostly contiguous. They're lined up next to each other. The Shiite nations of note are Pakistan, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan. When you hear those names, it evokes violence in your mind. You think that this is someone we should consider to be a threat. Well, they are a threat. But Malaysia is 90% Muslim. When we hear that, do we feel threatened by Malaysia? We don't. As a matter of fact, my first book was published in Malaysia, which I thought was so odd that a book written by a Jewish believer about Jewish life and lessons learned from the Tree of Life, that of all the nations of the world, that it would be acquired by a Malaysian publisher that published it in Malay. And I have a copy of it. So they are being threatened as well because they don't align with the Shiite agenda. So they are considered infidels, even though they worship Allah and believe in the Prophet Muhammad. So it is a war within a belief system. So that's why the decision Lapid made in conjunction with his erstwhile coalition partner, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, to cozy up to Biden is also a disaster. The fact that Biden wouldn't even take a phone call from Lapid in which he might have argued his case on the issue this week had to sting. Being told the president was on vacation and we would speak to him another time, when an existential question like a nuclear Iran is on the table, is not exactly the response he expected when he heralded the shift from high-octane advocacy on the issue that was favored by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to quiet behind-the-scenes diplomacy. It's true that few thought that 19 months into the Biden administration, the United States would still be seeking a new accord with Iran. The widespread assumption, especially on the part of Biden and the Democrats, that having taken former Secretary of State John Kerry's advice to not negotiate with the Trump administration after it withdrew from the deal, Tehran would be eager to quickly sign up for more American appeasement. Instead, its leaders have returned to the same hard-nosed negotiating tactics that won them so many devastating concessions from Obama. The result has been more concessions, and contrary to Biden's promises, another deal that will ignore Iranian terrorism, illegal missile building, and, like its predecessor, has an expiration date. While Biden's apologists blame Iran's progress towards a bomb on former President Donald Trump for his decision to pull out from the deal, that is misleading. While we don't know for sure what would have happened had Trump's maximum pressure campaign continued into 2021, it had a chance of success in forcing the Iranians to negotiate a better agreement. It was Biden's election that doomed that strategy and nothing else. But at this point, the dilemma facing the Israelis is not whether or not to blame Trump, or, as some on the Israeli left also falsely claim, that it's somehow Netanyahu's fault for not attacking Iran earlier or for opposing Obama's effort. Rather, Jerusalem must now confront two crucial issues. One is how to cope with the impending reality of a newly empowered and enriched Iran. The second is whether to risk angering Biden by taking actions, either military or further covert operations, to forestall the Iranian threat at a time when the United States will be trying to pretend that it has solved the nuclear problem. Once a nuclear deal is in place, the assumption that Israel can act with impunity to attack or sabotage Iran's nuclear facilities is magical thinking. The notion that, as Barnea and other Israeli officials continue to claim, Jerusalem will retain its freedom of action to do what it thinks is in its best interest, as well as that of its new Arab allies, who are also afraid of Iran, is just not true. It remains to be seen who will lead Israel after the Knesset election in November. Whether it is Netanyahu or Lapid, who is unlikely to win a majority but could hang on if the election results in another stalemate. The idea of openly flouting America's wishes at a time when Washington will, however, falsely claim the nuclear peril is averted isn't something either man would do, except as a last resort. That means that in spite of the obvious dangers this presents in terms of eventual nuclear peril and an immediate increase in the threat level from terrorism, Biden thinks he can force Israel to live with an Iran that is a threshold nuclear state. He will do this by offering carrots in terms of aid and empty assurances about taking action if Israel were to break out to a nuclear weapon. Israel will have to wait until 2025 and the return of Trump or some other Republican to the White House, at the earliest, to have an American president who will understand that unless the deal is scrapped and replaced with something stronger, the West will be standing by feebly, accepting Iran getting a weapon once its restrictions expire. Having such an American partner in confronting Iran is a long way off, and even then, not a certainty. Until then, Israel's government must learn from its mistakes. By failing to raise the alarm about Iran in the vain hope of influencing Biden to stand up to Iran, Israel has undermined efforts to mobilize opposition to appeasement in the United States. Lapid and Bennett took for granted the ability of Israel's friends in Congress to pressure Biden against this folly, or simply discounted and possibly that the administration could be stopped. That was a mistake. Whoever runs Israel's government in the coming year will need to drop the nice guy routine with Biden and return to a tougher approach that can encourage the Jewish state's many friends to speak up. For all the trappings and benefits of this great friendship, even under Biden, a U.S.-Israel relationship that is predicated on Jerusalem keeping quiet about American policies that are abetting an existential threat is no alliance at all. While the Jewish left has acted as if standing up for Israel's interests will damage the alliance, what we've learned in the last year is that not speaking up can do even more harm to it. That's story 2, reposted and shared from the Jewish National Service. Israel, our only democratic partner in the Middle East, is being used as a pawn in these negotiations with Iran. Anyone who believes that America has Israel's best interest at heart is suffering from a delusion. With this climate program of America having to cease production and moving to a 2030 standard for electric vehicles, we are no longer an exporter of oil. And therefore, we're driving business, including discussing our own acquisition of foreign oil from Iran. The only way it makes sense, in a very twisted way, and I have to look at it from the entire 360 and try to understand this, is that unless the Biden administration goes all in on this climate agenda, including advancing the cause of Iranian oil, then they will feel like they are only partially committed or only partially in on this climate agenda. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Anyone who believes that a human being is capable of usurping God's sovereignty over this world, over this galaxy, over all of creation, anyone who believes that man can usurp God's authority on earth is no believer at all. God is sovereign. And at the sweep of his hand, at the breath of his mouth, can cleanse and replace every molecule of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Breathe fresh air into this planet anytime he so desires. And if you don't believe that, then you don't believe in the one true sovereign God, your creator. And if you don't believe in that, then you can't possibly believe that he gave his only begotten Son as a living sacrifice for our sin. And because you believe in that atonement, that you will have eternal life. You can't believe in one and not the other. You just cannot believe in the one and not the other. We're going to take a short break. And when we return from break, we'll continue talking about what's going on in the Middle East that has significant prophetic impact on all of us. We'll be right back.
We pray today's show blessed you as much as it did us, and hope you will join us weekdays from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Replays of the show are available online at www.live365.com. Please email your questions and comments to Rabbi Eric at ignitinganation.com or on our social media platforms. Stay tuned for the second hour of Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. The phone lines are open at 850-660-9595.
To some people, the sound of a baby babbling doesn't mean much. But that's not necessarily true. By 6 months, they're combining vowels and consonants. By 9 months, they're trying out different kinds of sounds. And by 12 months, their babbling is beginning to take on some meaning. Especially if there's no babbling at all. Little to no babbling by 12 months or later is just one of the possible signs of autism in children. Early screening and intervention can make a lifetime of difference and unlock a world of possibilities. Take the first step at autismspeaks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
The following is made possible by Dad.
Why was the basketball court all wet? Because the players kept dribbling all over it.
The dad joke. Corny, groan-worthy, but also one of the simplest ways to share a moment with your kids.
Why do you have to be careful when it's raining cats and dogs? Because you might step in a poodle.
And kids that spend more time with their dads grow up to be smarter, more successful.
Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding.
And with any luck, funnier adults.
Why didn't the skeleton go to the dance? Because he didn't have any body to go with.
Dad jokes rule. So take a moment to make a moment and give your kid a laugh. It's as easy as going to fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
That's really funny.
The program you are listening to is brought to you by Igniting a Nation, a 501c3 nonprofit ministry. We are 100% supported by your contributions. You can partner with us and support this program, our outreach in Kisii, Kenya, and our support of Israel. Visit us at www.ianbn.com and take advantage of access to thousands of hours of teaching. You can also donate there on our social media platforms. Your support is a blessing here, there, and everywhere. Welcome back to Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. Here's your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, ready to take your calls at 850-660-9595.
Hello and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. We are taking your calls at 850-660-9595. And as a special bonus, the first-time callers will receive a signed copy of my new book, 315, The Genesis of All Prophecy. And we encourage you to call and have comments about what you're hearing about what's going on prophetically. The story continues, and there's much more as we look at a report that was published by the GatesstoneInstitute.org. I share these sites with you. You can subscribe to the many newsletters, the many prophecy sites that I subscribe to. I have an influx in my mailbox every day, of literally hundreds of stories, maybe even thousands. And I scan them and look for patterns and look for those headlines which are significant, those which are showing me trends, something that I need to pay attention to. And I've stated this before, that headline prophecy, those that try to take every headline and fit it into prophecy is not something that I participate in. I look for the patterns and I look for the timing, and knowing from a Jewish perspective where we are on the calendar, knowing the preparations being made, knowing what goes on in the synagogue, having attended one all my life, knowing what this time of year means in preparing for the fall feasts is really quite significant and is an opportunity for the enemy to ramp up and to turn the burners up. So this report out of the Gatestone Institute is entitled, Iran Prepares to Take Out Israel Right After the Iran Deal is Signed. This is by Khaled Abu Toame. As the Biden administration seems to be moving closer to reaching a nuclear deal with Iran, the mullahs in Tehran are encouraging their Lebanese and Palestinian terrorist proxies to prepare for waging war on Israel. The mullahs appear convinced that once the Biden administration capitulates completely to their demands for reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, they will be able to step up their already significant efforts to eliminate Israel and export their Islamic revolution to Arab and Islamic countries. Iran already occupies 4 Arab countries: Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. So think back through history. This would be the formation of what we would call the Ottoman Empire. I'm sorry, not the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire. The Ottomans were the Turks. invading the nations around them. And if you take a look in the book of Esther and you take a look at the, I think, 127 provinces from Persia to Kush, you'll see how far it extended. And they're looking to replicate that because part of the Islamic ideology is that if Islam has ever ruled over a parcel of land, regardless if they were in a battle and were ultimately defeated and lost the land, that eternally that land belongs to them and they are entitled to it. So they believe, because they ruled what is today called Israel at one point in time, that they have ultimate authority to take back what belongs to them. Now, you might say, well, okay, is there any merit to that? Not when you consider God choosing Abraham some 3,500 years ago and Joshua entering into the promised land and the tribes setting up their territories within the promised land thousands of years before Islam came into existence. And God's covenant is with Israel. His covenant was with with Isaac, not with Ishmael. Ishmael was not the son of the promise. Isaac was the son of the promise. And we have to look historically at this and logically at this. This would be tantamount to, we have to give California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas back to Spain because they once ruled there. There was a move underfoot for California to secede from the United States that was laughed away. Imagine the idea of just giving California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas to Spain, or to Mexico through Spain. It looks like that's kind of happening with this open border, which is why many people are so upset, is because it's America and it's supposed to be a sovereign nation. A sovereign nation has borders. The mullahs are not oblivious to the growing voices in the Arab world that complain about the weakness of the United States and how the Biden administration's policy of appeasement towards Iran is undermining the Americans' credibility and jeopardizing the security and the stability of Arab and Islamic countries. The world sees how weak this administration is. And we, the American public, can do nothing about it. Yes, we can support the conservative candidates who are opposed to this agenda in the midterm elections, and you, 1 in 5 Christians who are not even registered to vote, should be convicted to not only register to vote, but to vote. And you, who are a registered voter who didn't vote and call yourself a believer, you're opposed to the Word of God. And I have a lengthy series available on what God has to say and what the Bible has to say about government. God was the creator of government. As a matter of fact, he refers to the increase of the government shall be upon Jesus. The government brings order to nations and to countries and to communities. But if you're not exercising your right to vote, you are abdicating your voice. You're yielding, you're submitting, you're surrendering to a leadership that today that does not represent your best interest, that does not represent 65% of Americans' interest. But our system, being our system, says that we're not going to violently overthrow the government and replace them with a coup, that we're going to use the democratic method of elections. But so much damage has already been done. And so much is being done each day that passes. Iran's mullahs appear to be so confident that the Biden administration has turned its back on its Arab allies in the Middle East that they are issuing direct threats, not only against Israel, but also against any Arab country that dares to cooperate with the Israelis. The latest threat came from the commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Navy Commodore Alireza Tangsiri, who warned that cooperation with Israel threatens security and stability in the Gulf region. It's time to remember that there are only 3 continents mentioned in the Bible: Asia, Africa, and Europe. So North America, South America, Australia, and the Arctic regions, not mentioned in the Bible. Therefore, the epicenter for biblical activity, for biblical prophecy, is going to be, the epicenter is going to be Jerusalem and Israel, and all the prophecies that lead to the conflict that's going to come inevitably between Israel and its neighbors, whether those are the neighbors that exist today that are immediately on their borders, or the expanded neighbors, should there be a war before the greater war. But war is coming to that region, which is one of the signs given to us as to how much closer we're drawing to the events that will ultimately lead to the return of Messiah. That means that the Antichrist must rise up. It's happening. Whether you believe it's happening or not, it's happening. And it's happening where God said it would happen. Tangsiri's warning was directed to America's Arab allies, especially the Gulf states, some of which have been conducting security cooperation with Israel. The timing of his threat was anything but coincidental. It came amid reports that the Biden administration is moving forward towards striking a new deal with Tehran's mullahs. The mullahs, in short, are sending a message to American allies in the Arab world that if they believe they can trust the Biden administration to protect them against Iran's expansionist plans or safeguard the security and stability, they are sorely mistaken. Addressing Americans' Arab allies, Tangsiri warned them not to allow U.S. or any other foreign countries to use their countries as bases for military and security operations. I don't take that threat lightly, because we have seen what Iran has done through its proxies in Syria, and the impact it's had on any country who would ally itself or align itself with an Israeli or American agenda. Any country that ignores the warning, Tangsiri said, will pay the price for its unfriendly and provocative behavior. The IRGC, he cautioned, is ready to carry out any mission to preserve the interest of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its heroic people. Meanwhile, the mullahs are busy trying to open a new battlefront against Israel, this time in the West Bank. Iran already has its own proxies in the Gaza Strip, Hamas and Islamic Jihad. In Lebanon, the mullahs have the Hezbollah terrorist militia, which has created a state within a state there and is also continuing to issue threats to attack Israel. These three terrorist groups, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah, for the past 3 decades have been launching terror attacks against Israel from Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. American news reports lightly, but when 10,000 rockets are launched, and they're not launched against military installations, they're not launched against air bases or naval stations, they're launched against hospitals, homes for the aged. This is an atrocity happening in this generation. We're watching it unfold in Ukraine, where we're looking at a Holocaust, a genocide of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of innocent lives, people walking down the street, people sleeping in their beds, are being attacked by a terrorist regime out of Russia that knows it has failed, but plans to take as many lives, as many casualties as it can. And I believe that Putin shares the same spirit that Adolf Hitler had. And that was that he wanted to be remembered as the greatest villain of all time. So in order for him to exceed that, he has to kill at least 10 million people to exceed the number attributed to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a great collector of artifacts and Jewish artwork and jewelry and anything to do with Judaism, because his goal was to have the largest collection in the world of artifacts from an extinct people, because it was his personal mission to make the Jews extinct. The agenda of Vladimir Putin, the real agenda, the personal agenda of Vladimir Putin, is yet to have been discovered. People attribute it to his desire to reform the former USSR. But there's a madness. There's a demonic madness in this man. And there are people who support him. And that gives me pause in my spirit. The mullahs appear to be so emboldened by the Biden administration's weakness that they are now openly talking about using the West Bank as a launching pad to attack Israel and kill Jews. Can you imagine terrorist organizations using cities in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, where both Arabs and Jews live, and use that? And we're talking about Ramallah, we're talking about Jericho, we're talking about Bethlehem, we're talking about Nazareth. Take a look at the cities that we're talking about that are considered to be the stronghold of the Palestinian agenda. And within those cities are large Palestinian Christian populations. Imagine launching an attack from within Israel's borders, putting them so close to Jerusalem, so close to Tel Aviv, so close to Haifa, so close to the economic centers of Israel. Once again, we will see war on the streets of Jerusalem. And the reminder and the remnant of the Six-Day War as you look at the wall and you see the bullet holes in the buildings, those buildings may not be standing. The commander of the IRGC, Major General Hussein Salami, revealed that Iran was working with Hamas and Islamic Jihad to extend their terrorist attacks from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank. The goal? To wage a war of attrition against Israel. The two groups already have a strong military presence in the West Bank, especially in the city of Jenin and Nablus, which are governed by the Palestinian Authority. Gaza is not the only field of resistance and struggle, but this struggle has also moved to the West Bank, Salami said, hinting that the mullahs were providing weapons to the Palestinians in the West Bank. Just as Gaza was armed by Iran, the West Bank can be armed in the same way, and this process will happen. Obtaining weapons has become much easier than before. There is no safe place at any time for Israel and its citizens. He boasted that a large number of Zionists have been killed in terrorist attacks by Palestinian terrorists in the past few months and stressed the necessity of continuing the jihad, the holy war against Israel. The Palestinians, Salami added, are now able to target any point in the Zionist entity. And this means that there is no safe place for the Zionists to protect them from Palestinian fire. The Palestinians have realized who their true friends are: Iran. He said that Hezbollah was already ready to join the fight against Israel. Hezbollah, which gained important experiences during the Syrian civil war, can lead a ground war and achieve victory. The Zionists know that the land is liberated by ground forces. As part of the mullah's plan to initiate another wave of terror against Israel, Salami said that he recently met in Tehran with Islamic Jihad Secretary General Zayed al-Naqala and discussed with him the disintegration and erosion of the capabilities of the Zionists. Under pressure from the Iranian regime, Hamas and Islamic Jihad representatives held a meeting in the Gaza Strip earlier this week to discuss ways of stepping up resistance against Israel. This meeting came amid reports of tensions between the two terrorist groups in the aftermath of Hamas's failure to join the recent three-day fighting between Israel and Islamic Jihad. Islamic Jihad and Iran are said to be disappointed with the Hamas terrorists for not coming to the rescue of their brothers in Islamic Jihad during the fighting with Israel. Hamas did not join the fighting, apparently for fear of being hit hard by Israel. Hamas seems to be worried that it could lose control of the Gaza Strip if it engages in another war with Israel, especially in light of the heavy casualties the group and many residents of the Gaza Strip sustained during previous rounds of attacks on Israel. Now remember, Hamas was elected. We've got a caller. Let me take this call. Shalom and welcome to Revealing the Truth. This is Rabbi Eric.
Hello, Rabbi. This is Myron, I guess you called me again. Hey, I am hearing your show on the phone this morning. When I called in, when he put me on hold, I could hear you still speaking. So that's good.
That's good news. That means we've got everything is firing on all cylinders. That makes me very, very happy.
Yes, and I'm still on YouTube. That was our choice to watch from, and it was working good. So I was glad to hear that. And we're very interesting show this morning. I'm telling you, it is. I was going to call in and just make a comment, if it's okay, about, the policies that I guess you'll say the Democrats and these people enact. So many times people die because of them. If you think of the coronavirus handling and the people in the nursing homes, that died in those cities that were under their control. Think of the riots in those cities that took place back a while back. Right. In the abortion thing, when they have their full policies enacted, cost lives. The border crisis, no telling how many people have died because of their handling of the border and what's going on down there, the human trafficking, the drugs. One story said 100,000 people a year now are overdosing with the fentanyl that's coming in. This just costs lives. And in Afghanistan, Lord, that was a debacle there that I don't know if we'll ever know how many people died because of that. It's really a terrible thing, not to mention, the 13 Americans, soldiers that died, and countless Afghans and other citizens that were over there, and some still there we haven't gotten out. I just don't. It's a scary situation to think about. It actually costs lives. The policies of these people. It's just not a political disagreement. In many cases, it's life and death.
And they don't care.
And the
bottom line is they don't care. They
get
the same reports we get. They see the statistics we get. They hear the outcry. But I will tell you that people like Mitch McConnell have not been vocal on the floor. The Senate minority leader has not been vocal on the floor. The Republican Party has not been vocal in an outcry about what this administration is doing and bringing to the forefront information. They've actually yielded to two policies that they've enacted laws.
You're exactly right.
That $500 billion to forgive student loans, when that $500 billion could go to feed the hungry and build shelter for the homeless, and you're forgiving a spoiled, entitled group of people. I worked for 4 solid years to pay for my college education while I was in college.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I wanted to share quick. Go ahead there. I'm sorry.
This is that shift towards socialism that says that the individual life does not matter.
That's right.
And it is going to take us, and it is, on one hand, it is devastating, upsetting, and disturbing. But on the other hand, it is exactly as it was prophesied. And we have to take comfort in the fact and the sovereignty of God, and knowing that the times of tribulation, whether or not this is the tribulation or this is a tribulation, is just the parsing of words. This is a time of tribulation for all mankind, being impacted by the cost of goods, being impacted by these rogue regimes, being impacted by a weak United States government, being impacted by the advance of terrorist organizations. These are the prophetic times the Bible told us about. So are we organizing prayer? Are we responding as a body in unity? Are we coming together in the city square? Are we coming together in the park? Are we holding rallies, prayer rallies, and bringing in speakers to speak about what we as believers can do at the local level? What we should be doing in anticipation of the midterm elections. What should we be doing when it comes time for the national convention and who the candidate for president is going to be? What should we be doing now as Americans? Or should we just be sitting back letting people who are politicians run the country the way they want to run the country?
Yeah. One more quick story before I let you go there. I had, I used to hear President Trump say that we had the finest military and equipment and things in the world. Nobody else had what we have, could do what we could do. And I thought, I hope that's the case and so forth. But I had a meeting, happened to have a chance meeting the other day with a person that I've known for many years. And the guy he's a scientist. That's what he does. The man has medical patents in his name and just a very smart individual. And he works for a company that does work with the government. I guess I could say the Pentagon. And he is the person who developed a formula to harden metal to a point to where that it was nobody else in the world had this. It was some kind of formula he developed to make armor for our troops to save lives that was much more hard to penetrate than anything else that was out there anywhere in the world. He actually developed this formula to make this metal, and it was being used in Afghanistan. And he was, of course, livid about the lives lost, first of all, but absolutely livid because we left that over there. And he said the Chinese are moving in immediately to take over where we left off there to do what they want to do in Afghanistan. And he said it will take them about 18 to 24 months to reverse engineer and figure out how that he made that armor. And he was just, he had a personal interest in that because he knew that it was nowhere else in the world and that the Chinese would soon have it. And boy, that was a disturbing story there, but it was true because I actually know the man that did this. He was telling me this out of his own mouth.
Well, it's appalling that trade secrets and the amount of information that we have given access to China and their ability to own as much land and as many businesses as they have in America. Don't be surprised when we see Chinese being taught more vigorously in our schools, that we see more and more activity out of China because we have become so dependent. And hopefully American businesses are seeing that there has been, because of the supply chain impact, the need to be made in America and to take this country back. Myron, I thank you. I've got to go to break, but God bless you, my friend. Love to the family, and we will talk soon.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you later. Bye.
All right, we're going to take a short break. And after this break, we will bring you the remaining half hour.
We'll be right back with more Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker right after this commercial break.
Hi, I'm Danica Patrick and proud aunt. Watching my nieces grow, play, and learn is amazing. But not every child gets to be carefree. 1 in 6 kids in the U.S. are hungry. 1 in 6. That little girl sitting alone at the playground, she can't play like the other kids. She doesn't have the energy because she's hungry. School lunch will be her only meal today. It breaks my heart that this is the reality in our country, but it's something that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. This food is then provided to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about using your imagination, learning, and having fun. These children shouldn't have to miss out on simply being a kid because they're hungry. To find out how you can help end childhood hunger in your community, visit feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Okay, men, this is your time. Maybe you didn't choose this, but you're here now. You're going to go out there and be an all-star caregiver. It's up to you. So what are you going to do? You're going to go grocery shopping, cook, clean, be there emotionally and physically. You got to dig deeper. Drive them to physical therapy, doctor's appointments. Don't you forget about the pharmacy. No, you won't. Because that's what caregivers do. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. This is your time to show the world, your family, and yourself that you're tougher than tough. Now go out there and be the best caregiver this world has ever seen. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
In the Garden of Eden, God spoke his first prophecy. Not much has been said or written about the eternal impact of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. What if every prophecy, and even Jesus' return, was tied to this prophecy and no one ever told you? Now you have a chance to read for yourself Rabbi Eric's latest book, 315, The Genesis of All Prophecy. Featured on Skywatch TV, this book is a must-read. Get your copy at Amazon or from Skywatch TV. And don't forget to order The Codist, Rabbi Eric's prophetic biblical thriller, exposing a diabolical plot to weaponize your DNA. And while you're at it, get his book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living. Welcome back to Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. Here's your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, ready to take your calls at 850-660-9595.
Hello and welcome back to this final half hour of today's edition of Revealing the Truth, Revealing Prophecy, where we do that every Wednesday. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow as we continue in our Revelation study. That is always an enjoyable time. All the shows are enjoyable to me, but really adding light into people's lives through that book of Revelation is something I take a great deal of pleasure in. So as we look at the rest of this story, in an attempt to appease their masters in Tehran, Hamas and Islamic Jihad issued a joint statement after the meeting in which they pledged to step up the armed struggle against Israel until the liberation of all of Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, a euphemism for the destruction of Israel. The threats by the IRGC against Israel and America's Arab allies should be sufficient to stop the Biden administration from surrendering to the mullahs' demand to remove the group from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. These threats, in addition, should serve as a reminder to the Biden administration of Iran's bloody schemes against Israel and Arab countries. Anyone who thinks that the mullahs will abandon their plans after the signing of a new nuclear deal is deceiving him or herself. The opposite is true. Appeasement will only further fortify the mullahs and their proxies and place into further peril the lives of both Arabs and Jews. This is a weighty matter. If you lived through this same economic period that we're living in right now, which is identical to what happened in the Carter administration, we're also seeing a very similar parallel set of events going on in Iran, where it wasn't the fall of the International Bank of Credit and Commerce that caused the devastating effect today on our economy that it did back then, but it is having to do with oil, it's having to do with terrorism, it's having to do with ideologies and agendas. And take a look a little bit deeper and look at Russia's alliance with Iran. Look at China's alliances with Iran. Look at those who are an existential threat to America and to Israel. and especially to Israel, which is God's epicenter. Now, the Bible tells us these things must happen, but none of us were really prepared for the devastating impact of the global impact of how important these decisions are and how difficult the coming days are going to be if war breaks out in the Middle East. In our lifetimes, we've lived through a number of wars, but another Middle Eastern war has the ability to become the catalyst to another world war. Because in Iran's agenda and their close proximity to bases and encampments and installations located near NATO countries, an attack on any one of those countries or their military will trigger an all-out response. This last story from our good friend Amir Safadi. If you have not been following Amir, I would strongly encourage you. His ministry is Behold Israel. He was a great tour guide in Israel. He then ran operations for Sarel inside, and now is a global spokesperson on prophecy, and has a wonderful, tremendous insight that I want to share with you in this last story. Iran has placed themselves in the forefront of the news. They are on the threshold of a new nuclear deal, which former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Fox News yesterday is far worse than the 2015 version. Europe is desperate for energy sources separate from Russia, thus they're ready to accept the demands of Iran. They don't care if the country goes nuclear. The bombs likely won't be coming their way. The U.S. is ready to drop almost all sanctions, which will put billions of dollars into the pockets of the Islamic regime in Tehran. The Republican Party has already announced that it will immediately cancel any agreement with Iran if they can get back in power after the November elections. It remains to be seen, however, if the votes go their way and if they'll have the follow-through to do it. Ultimately, it's all moot anyway. As I've said for a long time, Iran already has everything they need to make a bomb. It's just a matter of whether they decide to do it or not. The expansion of Iran proxy militias around Israel is growing. In the north, they're in Lebanon and Syria. In the east, they're in Iraq and Iran. To the south, they're in Gaza and Yemen. Iran opposition groups are reporting that the country is establishing a new military base called Malik al-Ashtar in the Daraa governorate of Syria, much too close to the Israeli border. Now Iran has begun arming militant Palestinians in the West Bank. In the same way that the Gaza Strip was armed, the West Bank can also be armed, and this process is happening, said Chief Commander of Islamic Revolutionary Guards, Major General Hossein Salami. The only factor that is slowing this expansion is Israel's constant strikes at the militia's weapons and infrastructures. Much of the weaponry with which Iran is arming their militias comes from their store of hundreds of thousands of rockets. Hezbollah and other proxy militias in Syria have over 150,000 rockets. Hamas in Gaza has 10,000. Yemen has tens of thousands. Many of these rockets are cheap and not very accurate, and the Iron Dome is equipped to deal with them. However, there are also thousands of ballistic missiles that are pointed at Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, are nearing completion of a new laser system that will be able to deal with many of these threats. But even when this new system is ready, if all these militias begin raining down their rocket arsenals at once, it could be devastating to Israel. As Iran continues to deepen relations with its proxy terrorists, they also are getting closer to a much bigger fish. One of the biggest allies and customers of Iran is now Russia. Because Iran's selling drones and training the Russian army as how to use them, New behind-the-scene deals are being set up for Russian oil. Fully expecting sanctions on Tehran to be lifted with a new nuclear deal, Moscow is planning on using Iran to bust their own sanctions by selling Russian oil through Iranian channels. This is bad news for Ukraine. It's also bad news for Israel, as Russia is strengthening their rhetoric toward Israeli actions against their friend Iran's proxy militias. Said Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, "We strongly condemn the dangerous practice of Israeli strikes on Syrian territory." The U.S. carries out airstrikes against Iranian proxy militias in Deir el-Zor, Syria, in response to a drone attack against American forces on August 15th. Today's strikes were necessary to protect and defend U.S. personnel, said spokesman Army Colonel Joe Butino. Meanwhile, Iran continues to attack the U.S. through its proxies, striking 2 American bases in Syria just yesterday. Just to make sure you understand, Iran is hitting the U.S. through their proxies, while the U.S. is striking back against those proxies while letting Iran completely off the hook. Unbelievable. Syria and Iranian forces and U.S.-backed SDF battled each other up in the north of Syria, resulting in a market being shelled in the city of Al-Bab. Civilian casualties included 14 dead, 5 of which were children, and at least 30 wounded. Hezbollah continues to threaten violence against Israel if the Karish oil rig begins operation. This is a flashpoint that could escalate quickly. Ukraine's Independence Day yesterday also marked 6 months since Russia invaded the nation. The military and civilian casualties continue to mount as Vladimir Putin stubbornly continues his prosecution of the war. The current hotspot is Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Under Russian control from early in the war, Ukraine is fearful of battling to gain the plant back. An improperly aimed shell could have disastrous effects. Daria Dugina was killed in a car bomb outside Moscow Saturday night. Her father, philosopher Alexander Dugin, a man known as Putin's brain, was supposed to be in the car with her before deciding to travel separately at the last moment. The woman the Russians say carried out the assassination is Natalia Bob, a citizen of Ukraine and member of the Ukrainian Special Operations Azov Regiment. Currently, she's in Estonia, and Russia has threatened a military response if Estonia does not capture her and extradite her to Moscow. Some, however, are accusing Putin of carrying out this murder as a false flag against Ukraine, after Dugin recently made some harsh remarks against the Russian president. Even as Turkey's inflation skyrocketed to 80%, its currency plunged on Friday to an all-time low. An economically desperate Turkey is a dangerous entity, and the world best keep its eyes on Erdogan and his government. Each day in the waters and in the air around Taiwan, there are incursions by Chinese planes and warships. This is a powder keg that can go off at any moment. Japan is weighing the wisdom of stockpiling 1,000 cruise missiles within 1,000 kilometers of China and North Korea. This would place both belligerent countries within range of Japan's arsenal in case of hostilities. Terrorist militants with ties to Al-Qaeda took control of the Hyatt Hotel in Mogadishu, Somalia last Friday. By the time the 30-hour ordeal was over, at least 21 people were dead and more than 117 were injured. 4 of the assailants were killed. However, it is unclear if there were others who escaped. Looking at the political realm in Israel, which is very similar to the one in the United States, it's easy to think that the majority isn't being represented by the current government. However, as much as it may have been true at the time elections were held in both nations, a great and terrible erosion is taking place in the conservative camp in each country. While the liberal progressive left is holding its ground, it's the conservative right that is experiencing progressive liberalism sprouting within its camp. Why am I writing these words? Certainly not to make you feel sad or angry, but to make you open your eyes to the ever-changing world in which we live. The change is rapid and is not for good. The true believers will never feel at home again in this world. We are becoming strangers and vagabonds on this earth. Can I find anything good in today's world? Yes, remember, it's often tribulations that purify us and make us zealous to carry out God's will. But the best of all is the fact that the further we are estranged from this world, the closer we are to the moment of that great taking away. Indeed, let's remember Jesus' words and rejoice. In John 16:33, these things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Very insightful, on point commentary from Amir Sephardi. Behold Israel Ministries. You can get their app and follow his daily telecasts and follow him through Jan Markle and her ministry, who have been aligned with Amir for many, many years. I know Amir, and I can testify to his tremendous insight and expertise and connections as coming out of the IDF, as having served in the military, knowing internally all the mechanisms after having been a tour guide and one of the key players in the operations of Sarel, which is the tour company that we use in Israel. Incredibly articulate, incredibly well informed, and becoming a rising voice in the prophetic world that we need to listen to. You know, as we're talking about the condition of the world, the state of affairs around us, it is time for us to issue a call to prayer. It's time for you to reach out to your leadership, to your congregation leaders, to your small groups, to your community organizers in the faith community, to put our voice behind a microphone, on a platform, taking a stand for Israel and against any action that America might take that would bring any harm in any way to Israel. Do I say this just because I'm Jewish? Do I say this just because I'm a believer? No, I say this because it aligns with God's word. Let all men be liars, but let God be true. Now, can we change the outcome? No, and in fact, in our heart of hearts, we really don't want to change the outcome. We want the Messiah to return. We want evil to be destroyed and disarmed and rendered irrelevant in this world and to be replaced by the good and the millennial reign of Messiah and the new heaven and the new earth. But while those prophecies are unfolding, we can do something about today. We may not be able to do something about tomorrow, but we can be vocal about today. That's what I'm doing. Being listened to in almost 100 countries across the nation, across the world. They're hearing what Igniting a Nation's position is. And we stand with Israel. And we will always stand with Israel because God stands with Israel. I encourage you to speak to your leadership, to have your congregation issue a proclamation in support of Israel, to get your communities, to get your state senators, to get your governor and your House of Representatives in your state to issue a proclamation, a resolution, like the one that's hanging on my wall, that acknowledges Israel's right to sovereignty and to its right to defend itself as a sovereign nation. America, we need to stand with Israel, and we need to do that from the citizenry to the government. And we can be silent no more. Because if we remain silent, and as Admir said, the liberal progressive group is solid and organized. It's the conservatives that are now leaning to a more progressive agenda. What, trying to stay more relevant or garner more votes or afraid to come up against what they think is influencing America? Abortion, LGBTQ plus rights, critical race theory. If we do not take a stand, we will fall. And I, for one, love this country. I, for one, love you. Wherever you are around the world, and if you are being persecuted, I stand with you in prayer. Our ministry stands with you in prayer. Our audience stands with you in prayer. And I will include you in this blessing from Numbers chapter 6 and verse 22 as we come to the end of today's program. In Numbers 6:22, the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the children of Israel." He goes on to say, "In this way I will put my name on them and I will bless them." Please bow your heads to receive the Aaronic benediction. Yivarecha Adonai v'yismerecha, Ya'er Adonai panavalecha v'kunecha, Yisar Adonai panavalecha v'yasimlecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance toward you and give you his peace. In the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus our Messiah. Amen and amen. Please stay tuned for these final announcements and commercials and join us tomorrow, right back here at 8 a.m. Central Time for Revealing the Truth, the Revelation Study. Shalom.
The program you are listening to is brought to you by Igniting a Nation, a 501c3 nonprofit ministry. We are 100% supported by your contributions. You can partner with us and support this program, our outreach in Kisii, Kenya, and our support of Israel. Visit us at www.ianbn.com and take advantage of access to thousands of hours of teaching. You can also donate there on our social media platforms. Your support is a blessing here, there, and everywhere.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, "That's rad." It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, "Totally, just shorter." As in, "I totes love going to the mall with Becca." Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, "Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case."
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad, just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Thank you for listening to Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. Join us tomorrow at 8 a.m. Central Time and give us a call at 850-660-9595. Full downloadable versions of all the teachings are available at ignitinganation.com. Don't forget to listen 24/7 for Revealing Life, Revealing the Bible, Revealing Prophecy, Revealing the Gospels, and more of Revealing the Truth. Download Igniting a Nation or listen on iHeartRadio. Until we see you right back here tomorrow, Shalom.